She wore a $40 dress and a smile. They kicked her out of first class for not looking rich. 12 hours later, 3 employees were demoted. What they didn't know: she owned the airline. Watch till the end. This is a takedown without raising a voice. It was just an ordinary morning at Denver International Airport. The air outside still carried the bite of early spring, crisp with a hint of frost, and inside the terminal, the hum of constant movement pulsed like a heartbeat. Families wrangled children and luggage. Business travelers shuffled with purpose, tapping away on phones, while overhead announcements echoed from crackling speakers. Amid the steady stream of hurried footsteps and rolling suitcases, a woman stepped off the shuttle bus, her feet landing on the terminal floor with quiet certainty. Rachel Carter didn't look like someone who turned heads. And that was the point. Her dress was made of ivory linen, wrinkled in places, falling just below her knees, hugging neither too tightly nor too loose. It was the kind of dress you might find on sale at a small, locally owned boutique, nothing flashy, no designer logo stitched into the hem. She wore flats, simple leather, slightly scuffed at the toes. Her hair, chestnut and fine, was half tied back with a hairpin shaped like a leaf. Her eyes, hazel with a flicker of gold, stayed focused forward, not flitting around nervously, not seeking validation. Her only accessory was a silver bracelet on her wrist, tarnished but clean, a little loose. It had belonged to her grandmother. She carried no Louis Vuitton, no Gucci tote, just a faded backpack slung over one shoulder, frayed at the seams, worn from years of loyal use. Inside it was a laptop, a tattered paperback novel, and a travel mug that still smelled faintly of cinnamon chai. Rachel moved with the kind of presence that was almost invisible, calm, deliberate, quietly confident in her own skin. She liked it that way. To anyone else, she looked like a teacher on spring break, or maybe a woman traveling home to care for an elderly parent. What no one could tell, not from her dress, not from her backpack, not even from her expression, was that Rachel Carter was one of the richest women in the country. She co-founded Ether Air, a budget airline that exploded into the market with its people-first approach. And while her husband Ethan Carter had become a public face, a tech mogul with charm and style, Rachel was the architect behind the service ethos, the reason Ether Air was known for treating passengers like humans instead of seat numbers. Rachel owned 40% of the airline, and she'd always insisted on flying commercial, not private. "You can't build for the people if you're never among them," she once told a journalist. Their private jet gathered dust in a Colorado hangar. She hadn't stepped foot in it for over a year. She glanced at her boarding pass, Seat 2A, first class. She almost smiled at the irony. She rarely used her first-class privileges, not because she couldn't, but because she didn't like what the front cabin had become, a fortress of judgment. A place where power dressed in tailored suits and diamond earrings scrutinized everything. Today, however, she had a red-eye flight to Seattle. She needed the quiet to finish reviewing a set of customer satisfaction reports. It wasn't vanity, it was strategy. She walked past the sleek glass doors of the first-class lounge, where baristas pulled espresso shots for men in three-piece suits and women who looked like magazine covers. Rachel didn't break her stride. She didn't need a flat white or ambient jazz to feel important. She reached gate C34 10 minutes before boarding. The gate agent, young, efficient-looking, her name tag reading Claire, gave Rachel a once-over. Claire's smile faltered just a little. Maybe it was the backpack. Or the dress. Rachel extended her pass without a word. "Ma'am," Claire said, politely but with a professional edge, "can you confirm your name?" "Rachel Carter." Claire's fingers danced across her keyboard. Her eyes flicked from the pass to Rachel's linen dress, then to the worn leather shoes. She hesitated. "One moment, please," Claire said, her tone neutral but just a touch suspicious. A man standing nearby, early 50s, expensive suit, Bluetooth headset still glowing, smirked. "Economy's that way," he muttered under his breath, eyes not leaving his phone. Rachel heard him. She said nothing. Inside the cabin, first class was everything the brochures promised. Plush cream-colored seats with mahogany trim, ambient lighting like the inside of a spa, a faint scent of lavender and lemon misted in the air. Rachel placed her backpack beneath seat 2A, sat down, and pulled out her novel. The seat molded comfortably to her back. She could already feel her mind focusing. That's when it began. A woman 2 rows behind, mid-40s, sleek bob haircut, dripping in gold, leaned into her companion and stage whispered, "Who let her in? That dress looks like a dish rag." The words floated over like perfume, sickly sweet, impossible to ignore. I bet she's slumming it for attention, the woman added with a light laugh. People love playing the poor card these days. Rachel turned a page in her book. Her fingers were steady, but her heartbeat wasn't. A flash from a phone camera. The woman took a photo, pretending to be casual. Rachel didn't move. She didn't look. She didn't take the bait. Then came another voice, male, from the next row up. Security must be slipping if we're letting stowaways in first class. Rachel could feel it, the way the cabin shifted around her. The way heads turned, glances whispered across the space like gossip made of eyes. Judgment moves like wind, silent, invisible, but unmistakable in its touch. She adjusted her bracelet. The silver caught the light. Her face stayed serene. Her skin, however, tingled. There's something humiliating about being watched as if you don't belong. She didn't speak. That was her way. The flight attendants arrived. Miranda was the lead, mid-40s, neatly put together, hair in a bun that looked like it had never been touched by the wind. Her expression wasn't hostile, but it wasn't friendly either. More like a librarian who suspects someone's brought in snacks. "Excuse me," Miranda said, stopping beside Rachel, eyes narrowed. "This is first class. May I see your boarding pass?" Rachel handed it to her without a word. Miranda studied it, frowning slightly. Her lips moved but didn't speak, like she was double-checking something in her head. "There appears to be an issue," she said at last. "Just stay here a moment." She walked away, not alone. Two other attendants joined her near the galley. Tracy, younger, bright lipstick, forced cheer in her tone. And Logan, tall and lean with a permanent squint, like he found everyone just a bit beneath him. "Does she look like first class to you?" Tracy whispered, not low enough. Logan chuckled. "Bet she grabbed someone's pass." Rachel sat still, her book open. She could hear everything. Miranda returned. She held the boarding pass like it was contaminated. "Ma'am, we need to verify something. Please step aside." Rachel rose slowly, took her backpack, walked toward the back without a word. The humiliation wasn't loud. It was subtle. Muted laughter. Side glances. A woman muttering, "Some people will try anything." A businessman chuckled to his seatmate. "What's next?" Flip-flops in the cockpit. Rachel walked the length of the plane. The aisles felt narrow, even claustrophobic. Each step a spotlight. Every pair of eyes a quiet gavel. Her seat, 32C, smelled like old upholstery and recycled air. She sat. The cushion dipped like it hadn't been filled since 2008. Across from her, a man in a loud tie leaned over. "Nice try, lady." "Stick to your lane," he said with a grin. His wife raised her phone. "This'll go viral," she whispered. Rachel opened her book again. Not to read. Just to have something in her hands. Outside the window, the plane taxied toward the runway. Inside, the storm was just beginning. The plane had only just lifted off when Rachel felt the first tremors of the storm building. It wasn't the kind that shook the fuselage or rattled the overhead bins. It was colder, more insidious. It vibrated through glances, hushed snickers, the occasional not-so-quiet comment cast across the cabin like shade on a sunny day. She knew the signs. She'd seen this kind of thing before, but never from this seat. Row 32 was near the back, just 3 rows in front of the last lavatory. The air felt thicker here, more used, recycled through too many lungs. A baby cried softly in the distance, its wail muffled by headphones and mild indifference. Rachel adjusted her seatbelt and tucked her bag beneath the seat in front of her. She tried to settle, to resume reading her novel, but the cabin wouldn't let her forget. "Not yet." "Hey, Greg, look," a woman's voice hissed, sharp with amusement. Rachel glanced sideways. Across the aisle sat a woman in a coral sweatshirt, her phone held just below the tray table. "It's the dress lady. From the front," she whispered to her husband, who wore a garish tie patterned with cartoon dogs. He didn't whisper back. "Ah, the class hopper. Thought you could sneak into the fancy seats, huh?" he said, not unkindly but not kindly either. His tone carried the smug confidence of someone who'd spent his life in the middle, never quite powerful, but always convinced he could spot who didn't belong. Rachel gave no answer. She didn't flinch. That only seemed to amuse him more. "I mean, gutsy move," he added, his laugh louder now. "But come on. Linen? And a backpack?" The woman next to him giggled, tapping rapidly at her phone. "This'll trend. I'm tagging Ether Air. Budget Barbie tries first class. Gets bounced. Cute, right?" Rachel tried to block them out. She stared at a line in her book, but read nothing. The words floated past her consciousness, thin as vapor. She could feel her throat tightening, not from sadness, but from that familiar tension that came when you knew you had to endure something you didn't cause and couldn't fix in the moment. A flight attendant passed by, blonde and younger than the others, with a badge that read Carla. She was pushing a cart stacked with complimentary water and pretzels. Her face was blank until she glanced at Rachel. Then, recognition sparked in her eyes, followed immediately by a smirk. She leaned slightly toward Logan, the tall attendant with the permanent scowl, who had just emerged from the galley. "That's her," Carla muttered a little too loud. "Front row reject." Logan snorted, brushing past with barely a glance. "Back where she belongs," he replied, his voice like sandpaper. Carla laughed, and for a moment, even the passengers around them joined in, some shaking their heads, others smirking behind half-closed tray tables. It didn't matter that no one knew the whole story. The narrative had been set. A woman who didn't look the part had tried to fake it, and now she was back among the regulars, exposed and shamed. Rachel remained still, her body calm, her expression unreadable. But her fingers curled slowly around the edge of her paperback, the tension spreading into her forearm. She could feel her grandmother's bracelet shift slightly down her wrist. She didn't look up. Across the aisle, Greg's wife, Lisa, judging by the bold name stitched into the strap of her tote, was still filming. "Smile, sweetie," she cooed mockingly. "Tell us how it felt to almost live the good life." The cruelty wasn't even creative. That was the part Rachel found most exhausting. Not just the judgment, but how lazy it was. The assumptions, the performative righteousness, the certainty that appearances equaled worth. No one asked her name. No one asked why she'd been moved. They didn't care. The story they wanted was far more entertaining. At the front of the cabin, Tracy began distributing drinks. She moved down the aisle with mechanical politeness, pouring tomato juice and ginger ale, handing out cups with tiny napkins, all while avoiding Rachel's row. When she reached 32, she looked down with feigned surprise. "Oh," she said with a syrupy smile. "Ran out back there. But I'm sure you're good with water." Logan trailed behind her, tossing a thin airline blanket toward Rachel without slowing down. It landed half on her lap, half on the floor. "Don't say we didn't hook you up," he quipped. Rachel caught it gently, folded it twice, and placed it beside her. Her movements were careful, composed, an internal rebellion against the absurd theater unfolding around her. Further up, Miranda, the head attendant, popped her head through the curtain, glancing briefly back toward economy. Her eyes scanned for a moment, then locked on Rachel. A small smirk tugged at her mouth. She turned to a colleague and whispered something that drew a laugh. Rachel caught the words special treatment and linen privilege. The game was still going. A girl across the aisle, maybe 19, pulled out her phone. "Yo," she whispered to a boy next to her, earbuds dangling. "That's the woman they kicked out. Look, she's just sitting there like nothing happened." She started filming. Her tweet went out minutes later. "Lady in 32C tried to sneak into first class. Got booted. Still acting like she's better than us. Hashtag budget Barbie, hashtag EtherAir." The likes started rolling in. Rachel sipped from her own water bottle, the condensation beating against her fingers. She wondered how many phones had captured her face in the last hour. How many strangers would scroll past those videos tonight, read those comments, and nod along in agreement. She closed her eyes for a moment, not in exhaustion but in focus. She had work to do. Not on the plane, not yet. But later. For now, she endured. Ellen, a woman in a loud floral dress with a booming voice, leaned forward from 3 rows up. "Bet she's writing a sob story for her blog," she chuckled. "Or suing the airline for, what, emotional distress." Greg chimed in. Lisa giggled. "Hope you're getting our good side, honey," she said, waving her phone. "I think she's hoping for a free upgrade next time," someone else added. "Dress poor, play victim, score points." Rachel opened her book again, finally reading a full paragraph. A line caught her eye, something about storms that pass over quietly but reshape entire landscapes. She smiled. Meal service began. Miranda walked down the aisle with a tray of first-class meals, fresh greens, grilled salmon, tiny pots of panna cotta. She stopped near Rachel's row, met her eyes for the first time since the incident, and turned to Tracy. "Nothing for her," she said flatly, loud enough for half the cabin to hear. "She's lucky to be on board at all." Rachel didn't respond. She didn't blink. But inside, something was shifting, not anger, not shame. Something colder, more exact. She reached into her bag, pulled out her laptop, and opened a folder labeled Flight Reports. She began typing. Across the aisle, Lisa kept filming. "Look, now she's pretending to be a businesswoman," she whispered. Bet she's Googling how to sue an airline. Greg laughed. Plot twist, she's gonna send an angry Yelp review. Oh no! Rachel kept typing. Logan passed by once more, a cup of tea in his hand. He offered it to Ellen in 33B, then glanced down at Rachel's laptop. What are you writing? He asked with mock curiosity. Your manifesto? Rachel looked up at him. No, she said softly. Yours. And then she smiled. It wasn't a bitter smile. It wasn't triumphant. It was patient. The kind of smile that knew exactly what was coming next. And that made it all the more terrifying. The hum of the cabin faded into a low, oppressive drone, a background static to the theater still unfolding around her. It had been 2 hours since takeoff. 2 hours since they stripped her of her seat, her privacy, and her dignity. 2 hours since the flight attendants began their public campaign to remind everyone exactly where they believed she belonged. And yet Rachel Carter sat in 32C with the kind of stillness that wasn't passive, it was practiced. A stillness that could make a room uneasy. A stillness not of surrender, but of precision. She was typing. Her fingers moved with a quiet rhythm across the keys, not rushed but methodical. She wasn't answering emails. She wasn't writing a complaint. She was building a record. A time-stamped, documented, cross-referenced ledger of the last 2 hours. Faces, names, words. A detailed account of not just her experience, but of the reactions surrounding it. The video posts, the overheard whispers, the neglect during meal service, the intentional cruelty masked as service. Every moment that had unfolded in front of her was captured, categorized and filed. Across the aisle, Lisa glanced over again and frowned. She's still typing, she muttered. What, is she writing a novel now? Poor girl on a plane? I can already see the sob story headline. They judge me by my dress. Boo-hoo. Greg chuckled, leaning back in his seat. I mean, if she puts as much effort into her job as she does pretending to be rich, she might actually afford first class one day. I give her points for commitment, Lisa smirked. Didn't even cry. Maybe she's a life coach. They're always pretending to be zen while falling apart inside. Rachel didn't look up, but she heard every word. Not because she was listening, but because they wanted her to hear. The cruelty wasn't accidental. It was performance art, public humiliation as collective sport. There was no need for truth when spectacle would do. Suddenly, a ping from her laptop. An auto-generated notification. New media tag, Ether Air trending. She clicked through. It had started. One of the team passengers, unknown name, seat 28A, had posted a TikTok clip of the woman who got booted from first class. The video, filmed at an angle over a shoulder, showed Rachel being quietly escorted toward the back. The overlay text read, "She really thought she could sneak into 2A LMAO." It had just crossed 400,000 views. The comments were a mix of disgust, mockery, and buried deeper, curiosity. She's probably homeless. She doesn't even look upset. Weird. Did she really sneak in though? I would have fought. She just left. Something's off. I feel like this is gonna blow up. Rachel's fingers paused. There it was. The first crack. The beginning of doubt in the narrative. Someone had noticed. The problem with cruelty in public spaces wasn't just that it existed. It was that it assumed an audience would always agree. But all it took was one person to hesitate, to second-guess the script being fed to them, and suddenly the whole structure wobbled. And Rachel was very, very good at letting things wobble. From the front of the cabin, Miranda reappeared. Her polished shoes clacked softly against the aisle floor as she returned from speaking with the pilot. As she passed Rachel's row, she made a point not to look down. But her stride faltered for just a second as she noticed the laptop open, Rachel typing, the quiet determination in her posture. She walked faster. In the galley, Miranda huddled again with Tracy and Logan. They stood half-shielded by the half-drawn curtain, whispering in that frantic, brittle tone of people who realize something might be unraveling. You told me she didn't match the manifest, Miranda hissed. She didn't, Tracy said, arms crossed. The screen showed 32C next to her name. Why are we going over this again? Because she hasn't said a word, and now she's documenting everything like a damn lawyer. Logan scoffed. She's not a lawyer. She's a con artist. Come on, backpack, thrift store dress, acting all stoic? It's a routine. Miranda didn't look convinced. People like that make noise, she muttered. She didn't make any noise. She just watched. They didn't notice the passenger in seat 7D, an older woman with silver hair and a silk scarf, who had overheard every word. Her name was Evelyn Monroe, and she had once run a publishing empire in Manhattan. She had seen many things in her life. This wasn't new, but it was instructive. She quietly picked up her phone and began recording the whispered huddle behind the curtain. Meanwhile, in economy, another voice spoke, this time from beside Rachel. A young woman in her early 20s, possibly a college student traveling home, leaned slightly toward her. She had earbuds in, one still dangling, the other removed. "Hey," she said quietly, hesitantly. I saw what happened earlier. That wasn't right." Rachel turned her head. Her expression was gentle, but distant. "They didn't even ask you any questions," the girl continued. "They just decided based on how you looked. It was weird." "I'm sorry." Rachel offered a small, grateful nod. "Thank you." The girl seemed relieved, emboldened. "If it's okay, are you okay?" "I'm fine," Rachel said, her voice even. The girl nodded, then whispered, "They're trending on Twitter. Someone's blowing this up. A lot of people are not cool with how you were treated." Rachel's lips curved just slightly. Not a smile. Something more like acknowledgement. Back at the galley, Miranda had made a decision. She returned to seat 32C, now visibly guarded, her smile stretched thin. "Ma'am," she said, "I'd like to offer you a complimentary beverage." Rachel didn't even blink. "Is that policy?" Miranda hesitated. "We're trying to ensure everyone has a pleasant experience." Rachel looked up. Her hazel eyes were calm but sharp. "Now you care about experience?" she asked softly. Miranda swallowed. We may have misunderstood earlier." Rachel closed her laptop. "I'm not thirsty." And that was it. Miranda stood there for another second too long, then walked away. Another notification pinged. Now a journalist had picked up the story. Just a tweet, a retweet really. But it came from a blue-check reporter known for covering classism in travel industries. The tweet read, "Sources say woman kicked from first class on Ether Air wasn't a stowaway. Was a paying passenger. Why was she moved?" It was accompanied by a still of Rachel's linen dress, her backpack, the moment she stood from seat 2A. The photo was elegant. Stark. Powerful. The replies came fast. "She looks more composed than half the people on that plane." "Ether Air's about to learn what quiet dignity looks like." Plot twist, she's gonna own the whole airline. Someone replied, "Check the name. Rachel Carter. Isn't that the co-founder's wife?" And just like that, the story turned. Rachel didn't have to say a word. She didn't have to defend herself, raise her voice, or plead. The truth, like always, had its own way of rising. Above the clouds, at 35,000 feet, the plane cruised forward toward Seattle. But in the cabin, the atmosphere had shifted. Those who had laughed grew quieter. Those who had filmed began to lower their phones. Even Greg, now scrolling through Twitter and recognizing a familiar image on his feed, began to pale. Lisa's phone buzzed again and again. She frowned as the notifications poured in, mentions, replies, quote tweets with her username. "Wait," she whispered. "Wait, is that really her? That Rachel Carter?" Across the aisle, Rachel reopened her laptop. She clicked into a folder labeled Company Training and Ethics and began adjusting a document titled Employee Conduct. Visibility versus integrity. She didn't look up. She didn't need to. By the time the plane touched down, her work would already be in motion. The wheels touched down on the tarmac with a muted thud, followed by the soft jolt of deceleration. Seattle's early morning mist clung to the windows like ghostly fingerprints, blurring the skyline in the distance. The hum of the engines wound down, and with it, the thin veneer of civility that had held the plane in fragile balance during the final hour of flight began to crack. Row 32 remained still. Rachel Carter sat with her laptop shut and her hands folded calmly on top. Her gaze was fixed outside, where the ground crew moved like shadows through the fog. She could hear the rustling of coats, the clicks of unfastening belts, the metallic snaps of overhead bins opening, and the predictable chorus of passengers scrambling to retrieve their belongings, as if those few seconds would save them from the chaos of re-entry into the world. She waited. That had always been one of her gifts. Patience with purpose. She knew there was power in timing, and this time, she would let the moment ripen. Let them walk past her. Let them see her. Let them realize. In first class, passengers lingered. Some were still laughing. Others whispered and peered down the aisle toward economy toward her. Among them was David Holt, the businessman in the tailored suit who had once muttered, "Economy's that way." He was speaking with unnecessary volume as he stood near the curtain, tugging on his carry-on. "She's the one who caused the delay," he said. "Trying to pass herself off as a VIP. In that dress? Honestly. His seatmate, a woman with thick pearls and thin tolerance, added, "It's disgraceful. Ether Air should be more discerning. If anyone can just look poor and get in, what's the point?" Others nodded. No one questioned the assumption that Rachel had somehow cheated the system. No one paused to wonder how the story they were telling themselves made so much sense. Too much sense, really. The island economy began to move. Greg, still oblivious, leaned across as he lifted his bag from the overhead compartment. "Guess this is where we part ways, Miss VIP," he said, half grinning. "Better luck next time." Rachel glanced up, her expression unreadable. "There won't be a next time," she said. He paused. Something in her voice didn't match the tone of defeat he was expecting. But he dismissed it, shaking his head and chuckling as he moved past her. Passengers filed out, the energy of disembarkment washing over the cabin like a tide. Some looked at her. Most didn't. But the weight of awareness was beginning to grow. A few passengers had already seen the posts online. A handful of glances were laced with discomfort instead of derision. One woman, a young mother with a sleeping toddler on her shoulder, offered a faint, apologetic smile. Rachel acknowledged it with a simple nod. And then it came. The moment she'd been waiting for. A young employee from Ether Air, barely in his 20s, lanyard swinging from his neck, stepped into the cabin and spoke with Miranda near the galley. The conversation was brief, but his urgency couldn't be missed. Miranda's posture shifted from casual confidence to controlled unease. Her eyes darted back toward the economy section toward Rachel. She was no longer sure what she was looking at. Rachel rose slowly as the aisle cleared. Her backpack was slung over one shoulder, her bracelet catching the faint cabin light. She waited until the row ahead of her moved, then stepped into the narrow space, her presence suddenly magnetic. The crew didn't speak. Logan, standing by the front, forced a nod that came out more like a twitch. Tracy pretended to check something on the galley monitor, her hand trembling slightly. Miranda, however, waited by the exit door, her forced professionalism now paper-thin. "Hope you learned something," she said, her tone icy. Rachel didn't pause. "I did," she replied. Tracy, with a grin that didn't reach her eyes, added, "Next time, maybe stick to buses." Logan offered a two-fingered mock salute. "Happy travels, backpack girl." Rachel stepped off the plane and into the gate corridor, where the cool air of Seattle greeted her like a breath of clarity. She walked slowly, steadily, past the gate area now abuzz with activity. On a bench near the exit sat Evelyn Monroe, the former publishing matriarch from 7D. She didn't speak, but as Rachel passed, she raised her phone in silent solidarity. She had recorded enough. She would know who to send it to. Rachel exited the terminal and hailed a cab, the driver glancing at her backpack and opening the door with a smile. She thanked him softly and slid into the back seat. As the car pulled away from the airport, her phone vibrated in her lap, first once, then again, then a steady flurry. She unlocked it. The viral storm had arrived. Lisa's video had exploded. Millions of views. Thousands of comments. But it wasn't the viral success she had expected. It had turned. The public wasn't amused. They were furious. She didn't even do anything wrong. They just saw her clothes and decided she wasn't first class enough. Ether Air's crew is trash. Fire them. Who is she? I want to buy stock in whatever company she runs. You can't humiliate someone just because they don't dress rich. Then came the real avalanche. Someone had identified her. A reply thread unraveling in real time. Wait. That's Rachel Carter. The Rachel Carter? Co-founder of Ether Air? No way. Guys, she OWNS the company. Plot twist of the year. Screenshots followed. Public records. Press photos. The bracelet. The dress. Matching images from a charity gala the year before, where Rachel had worn the same outfit in solidarity with low-income mothers she supported. Suddenly, the narrative was no longer about a poor woman faking status. It was about a powerful woman who had chosen humility and was punished for it. Rachel scrolled through the firestorm with surgical detachment. She clicked open a document titled Service Incidents Internal Review. It was already 47 pages long. She added a few new entries. She didn't cry. She didn't shake. Her hands moved with calm efficiency. By the time she arrived at Ether Air's Seattle headquarters, a tall glass tower that shimmered in the morning sun, the media had started to assemble outside. But she didn't enter through the front. She took the side elevator, the one used by staff and suppliers, and emerged directly onto the executive floor. In the boardroom, the mood was already tense. The PR team sat with tablets in hand, faces pale. Legal was present. A few senior board members whispered near the windows, clearly unsure of what the day would hold. Miranda, Tracy, and Logan sat in a row near the end of the table, brought in under the pretense of a staff review. They were unaware of what awaited them. Then the door opened, and in walked Ethan Carter, tall, composed, his presence commanding instant silence. Behind him was Rachel, still in the same $40 dress, her face lit with quiet focus. Miranda paled. Tracy's mouth opened slightly. Logan blinked rapidly, calculating his chances of escape. Ethan didn't sit. He stood at the head of the table, his voice cool. Yesterday, he began, a passenger on Flight 472 from Denver to Seattle was humiliated, moved from first class without cause, and subjected to public ridicule by both staff and fellow travelers. He paused. That passenger was Rachel Carter, my wife, your co-founder, the architect of EtherAir's service charter. Gasps. One board member dropped her pen. Rachel stepped forward, placing a folder on the table. This, she said, is a report detailing 27 incidents of class-based discrimination across our flights in the last quarter alone. I wasn't the first. I just happened to be the most visible. She looked directly at Miranda. What you mistook for weakness was choice. What you dismissed as cheap was intention. I dress like the people we claim to serve. And for that, you turned me into a spectacle. The room was silent. Then Ethan added, we are not a brand that humiliates people for not wearing labels. We are a brand that promised to redefine travel with heart. So we must now ask, who are we protecting, our passengers or our pride? A vote was called, a decision made, not just about the 3 staff involved, but about the culture they had enabled. Retraining, reform, redemption, and for Miranda, Tracy, and Logan, consequences that would arrive not in fury but in fairness. Rachel didn't smile. Not yet, because this wasn't the ending. It was the reckoning before the rebuild. The boardroom remained frozen for a long moment after Rachel's words faded into the thick, electrified silence. Outside the windows, the morning light danced on Puget Sound, as if nature was indifferent to the unfolding reckoning within. No one moved. Not the PR manager gripping her tablet, so tightly her knuckles turned white. Not the legal counsel, who now stared at his notepad with quiet dread. And certainly not Miranda, Tracy, or Logan, each of whom sat in stiff, statue-like posture, eyes down, pulses quickening. Rachel remained standing. She didn't fidget. She didn't break eye contact with the room. There was no anger in her voice. But her presence carried something heavier, something less performative than outrage and more enduring than fury. She didn't need volume. Her authority came from truth. It came from lived experience. And now, for the first time, those who had dismissed her as invisible were being forced to see her, not just as a woman in a linen dress, but as a mirror reflecting everything they didn't want to confront about themselves. We are not here today to assign blame out of vindictiveness, she said, her voice even. We are here because a company that claims to serve the people cannot afford to betray them. She walked around the table slowly, her steps measured. I've reviewed customer service logs. Complaints that never reached upper management. Incidents like mine, less viral, less visible, but no less unjust. Passengers downgraded because they looked tired. Elderly customers ignored because they didn't speak clearly. Single mothers treated like criminals for requesting extra assistance. This isn't an isolated event. It's a pattern rooted in something far more dangerous than inefficiency bias. The word landed like a dropped stone in a still pond. Ethan leaned forward. The board has already voted to launch a full internal audit, he said. But more than that, we're rewriting policy. From training to employee evaluations. From how we respond to social media crises to how we prevent them in the first place. Sarah Lynn, the head of PR, spoke next. Her voice was calm, but layered with the shame of realization. We'd like to propose a new initiative spearheaded by Rachel, she said. A complete overhaul of our brand's service culture. A campaign we're calling Respect Beyond Appearance. Not just a slogan, but a structural reset. The phrase was met with nods around the table. Some slow, some hesitant, some downright eager, as if the weight of guilt could be lifted by the act of agreeing to change. But it wasn't over yet. Rachel turned toward the 3 flight attendants. We are not firing you, she said, because this isn't just about you. It's about the systems that made your choices seem acceptable. But accountability still matters. Miranda looked up. Her eyes were red, though no tears had fallen. I didn't mean to. I know, Rachel interrupted softly. None of you meant to. That's the point. Bias rarely shows up dressed as malice. It arrives wearing a uniform of assumptions, stitched into muscle memory. You didn't act with hate. You acted with certainty. That's what makes it dangerous. Logan opened his mouth to argue, instinctive, defensive, but then shut it again. There was no point. Not here. Not now. Tracy sat in stunned silence, her cheeks flushed. Rachel reached into her folder and pulled out 3 envelopes. Miranda, you will be reassigned to the customer complaint desk for 30 days. Every call you take will be from someone who feels they weren't treated like a person. Listen to them. Hear what they're really saying beneath the anger. Miranda nodded slowly, as if accepting a sentence she already knew she deserved. Tracy, you will spend the next month serving in economy. No shortcuts. No rank pulling. Walk the aisle. Look people in the eyes. See who you've overlooked. Tracy's lips trembled, but she said nothing. Logan, Rachel said, turning to the lanky man who now sat ramrod straight in his chair. You'll be on luggage duty. 3 weeks in baggage claim. Rain or shine. You'll handle every lost suitcase, every dented stroller, every angry traveler. And you'll do it with grace. Logan's jaw tightened, but he didn't protest. He just nodded once, stiffly. These aren't punishments, Rachel said. They're perspectives. And when you return to the skies, you'll return not as enforcers, but as stewards of humanity. The meeting concluded with a unanimous vote to enact the new training protocol. Rachel's report, now formally titled Visibility, Dignity, and the Culture of Assumption, was adopted as the framework for all staff training going forward. The 3 attendants exited the room first, heads lowered, shadows trailing behind them. But that wasn't the end. The aftermath spread like wildfire. News broke within hours. Not because Rachel issued a press release, she didn't need to. The internet had done the work. The story was now everywhere. Ether Air flight crew reassigned after mistreating co-founder in disguise. When assumptions fly, airline exec pretends to be passenger, exposes systemic bias. She wore a $40 dress and changed a $5 billion airline overnight. Comments flooded in. I've never felt seen by an airline before. This changes everything. I'd fly Ether just to support her now. She didn't yell. She didn't sue. She just dismantled the game with grace. Rachel watched it unfold not from a press podium or a CEO's desk, but from a small corner office near the employee lounge in the Seattle headquarters. It was the same office she'd used when the company first launched. No view, no personal assistant. Just a space where she could think. She pulled her grandmother's bracelet from her wrist and set it on the desk beside her laptop as she began designing the rollout for the new Respect Beyond Appearance training series. But the ripples kept spreading. A week later, Tracy walked into the economy section of Flight 298 from LAX to Newark wearing a fresh uniform and carrying a tray of snacks. Passengers whispered. Some recognized her from the viral video. Others had read the follow-up profiles, stories of redemption in motion. Tracy smiled through it. Not forced this time. Earnest. She stopped beside a mother traveling alone with 2 toddlers and a diaper bag that had exploded mid-takeoff. Instead of walking past, Tracy bent down, handed her extra napkins, offered to hold one child while the mother cleaned the other. The woman looked up at her, surprised. Thank you. No one's ever, Tracy nodded. Everyone deserves help. That evening, she cried in her hotel room, not from shame, but from the strange, aching gratitude of being given a second chance to do better. In the call center, Miranda sat through her 5th angry call of the morning. The woman on the other end was furious about a delayed flight that caused her to miss her father's funeral. Miranda listened. For the first time in her career, she didn't just follow the script. She apologized, not from the bullet points, but from a place of real regret. The woman on the line was silent for a moment, then whispered, "Thank you. No one's ever said that and meant it." Logan, soaked from head to toe in the Seattle rain, lugged a heavy suitcase to a family of 5 whose stroller had been smashed in transit. He handed over the replacement, wrapped in plastic. The father gave him a look, equal parts confusion and appreciation. "You okay, man?" he asked, seeing Logan's soaked uniform. "Working on it," Logan replied with a smirk. "And yeah, I think I am." And Rachel? 3 weeks later, she boarded a flight from Denver to Chicago. Same backpack. Same silver bracelet. Same $40 linen dress. She approached the gate with quiet steps. A new gate agent, Maya, freshly trained, looked up and smiled warmly. "Welcome aboard, Miss Carter." Rachel nodded, offering a soft thank you. The first-class cabin was bright. The flight crew greeted her with warmth, not performative, not rehearsed. Logan stood near the entrance, his uniform still slightly wrinkled, but his posture now different. Humbled. Human. "Welcome back, Miss Carter," he said, his voice low but sincere. "Thank you for the lesson." Rachel met his gaze, smiled softly, and moved to seat 2A. She placed her backpack beneath her seat, opened her book, and settled in. Across the aisle, a young woman in a hoodie clutched a worn duffel bag. The flight attendants offered her extra pillows, a warm meal, and kind words. No one asked her to move. Rachel watched, her heart full. Not for herself, but for what was now possible. Because dignity, she had always believed, should never depend on how someone looks. And sometimes the most powerful revolutions begin in silence, with one woman in a simple dress who refused to disappear. The weeks that followed were not marked by fanfare or corporate press conferences. Rachel had never been interested in spectacle. She believed real change was forged not in boardrooms but in repetition, in the small, consistent choices people made every single day when no one was filming. Her focus wasn't on headlines or trending hashtags anymore. That moment had passed. Now came the quiet revolution. Inside Ether Air headquarters, tucked away on the 11th floor, the newly formed Human First Task Force had become Rachel's main battlefield. It wasn't glamorous. It was spreadsheets and call logs, analytics reports, and late-night Zooms with regional managers. But it was also where change began to crystallize. The company's service training modules, once templated, outdated, and filled with tone-deaf scripts, were completely dismantled under Rachel's guidance. In their place emerged a new curriculum that was unapologetically human. Every module now began with a story. Real stories. Some from passengers. Some from crew. Some from people like Carla, the young flight attendant who had once smirked at Rachel's presence in row 32, but who now, after witnessing the fallout, volunteered to help rewrite the very system that had shaped her assumptions. "I wasn't proud of how I acted," Carla confessed in a quiet meeting one Tuesday afternoon. "I saw someone who didn't fit the mold, and I assumed. It wasn't policy. It was instinct. A bad one." Rachel didn't shame her. Instead, she handed Carla a tablet loaded with anonymous passenger testimonies. Some were heartbreaking. Some were maddening. All were real. "Learn from them," Rachel said. "Then help others do the same." Meanwhile, Ethan worked behind the scenes with operations, pushing for a restructuring of hiring incentives and leadership assessments. Promotions, from now on, wouldn't just be based on punctuality or complaint-free service. They would require emotional intelligence, peer recognition, and demonstrated capacity for empathy. Ether Air's internal scorecards were redesigned to prioritize respect, not just efficiency. But the real test of the transformation wasn't in policies or pledges. It was in Flight 629. It had been 6 weeks since Rachel's infamous journey in seat 32C, when Ether Air assigned her to fly incognito again, this time as a silent observer for the company's new mystery passenger program. The idea wasn't hers, but she supported it. Not to catch employees in wrongdoing, but to catch them in moments of growth. She wore different clothes this time, not the linen dress. Just jeans, sneakers, and a navy cardigan. Her hair was loose. The bracelet stayed, though. It always did. She boarded the flight from San Diego to Minneapolis and took a seat in the middle of economy, row 18, nestled between a high school teacher reading lesson plans and an elderly man nervously clutching a rosary. The flight crew didn't recognize her, and that was exactly what she wanted. An hour into the flight, turbulence rocked the cabin. Nothing severe, but enough to spill a drink or two and rattle a few nerves. Rachel watched quietly as a woman in seat 22D began to panic. She was alone, mid-40s, pale, with fingers clenching the armrest like it might fly off if she let go. Rachel recognized that look, quiet terror disguised as tension. It was more than fear of flying. It was the fear of losing control. A young flight attendant named Elijah moved quickly, crouching beside the woman and speaking in a voice so soft Rachel could barely hear it. He held her gaze, breathed with her. Didn't patronize. Didn't hurry. Just stayed. "Count with me," he said gently. "Inhale for 4, hold for 2, out for 6. The woman nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. Rachel didn't take her eyes off the moment. Not for its drama, but for its care. Elijah stayed with the woman until her hands relaxed. Then he returned 5 minutes later with warm water and a note, handwritten. "You're safe. You're not alone. We're honored to fly with you today." Rachel smiled. That note said more about progress than any memo ever could. Later, as the crew served drinks, Rachel intentionally asked a question in Spanish. Something small, just about apple juice. The flight attendant, a woman named Indira, didn't falter. She answered fluently, with kindness, and then circled back 10 minutes later with a bilingual pamphlet about accessibility services. Rachel tucked it into her book. When the flight landed, Rachel waited until the plane emptied before quietly identifying herself to the crew. Elijah's eyes widened. "You were on the flight," he stammered. Rachel nodded. "And I saw everything I needed to see." He flushed. I hope we did okay." "You didn't just do okay," she said. "You led." That phrase spread quietly through ether air channels in the days that followed. You led. It became something whispered from one crew member to another when someone stepped up, went the extra inch, or remembered to treat a stranger like they mattered. Back at headquarters, Rachel gathered the task force once more. "This isn't about branding," she told them. "We don't put human kindness in a commercial. We live it. Every seat. Every gate. Every shift." In the weeks that followed, Ether Air launched a quiet campaign called Dignity Travels. It wasn't flashy. No celebrity endorsements. Just short documentary-style clips of employees reflecting on mistakes they'd made and the people who helped them grow past them. Tracy appeared in one. In her video, she sat on a bench near a runway, wind brushing her face. She wore no makeup, just a navy uniform and the look of someone who had been changed by proximity to consequence. "I used to think first class meant first to be treated well," she said. "Now I know. Every passenger is a human first. Class comes after." The video went viral, not because it was dramatic, but because it was honest. Even Miranda, once the most rigid of the trio, found herself humbled at the complaint desk. It was there, after her 89th call in 3 days, that something inside her cracked, not in defeat, but in understanding. One night, she called Rachel. Not to defend herself, but to thank her. "I used to pride myself on being firm," Miranda admitted. "Now I know firmness without empathy is just coldness." Rachel listened. She didn't need apologies. Growth was apology enough. That evening, Rachel visited the old maintenance hangar at the edge of the Denver runway. It was the place she and Ethan had once stood when Ether Air was nothing but a dream scribbled on a whiteboard and a borrowed $300,000. There, painted on the wall, was the company's first motto, one they'd long since stopped using in marketing but never forgot. "Above the clouds, every heart matters." Rachel stared at it for a long time. She thought of all the passengers still unseen. The ones without platforms. The ones who would never trend. She thought of the silent humiliations people endured every day in spaces that were supposed to serve them. And she thought of the people within the company now learning to see again, to listen again. This, she realized, was never about an airline. It was about any space where power could disguise itself as procedure, where kindness could be trained out of people in the name of efficiency. Rachel ran her fingers across the faded paint on the hangar wall. It was still there, still true. The real sky, she knew now, wasn't outside the plane. It was what we created between one another. And hers? It was only just beginning to open. 3 months after that fateful flight, Ether Air was no longer the same airline, and neither was the world watching it. But the real measure of transformation was not found in boardroom statements or social media metrics. It was visible in the quiet, almost invisible ripples that reached further than anyone had expected. Policies had shifted, yes. Training was overhauled. Uniform protocols changed. Yet, what was most remarkable was the shift in behavior, not from obligation but from belief. Across the country, passengers began to share new stories, this time not of humiliation, but of humanity. A college student stranded in Chicago shared how an Ether Air attendant sat beside her during a weather delay, offering comfort and a sandwich. A single father in Atlanta wrote about the crew, who helped him juggle luggage, car seats, and 2 toddlers without ever making him feel like a burden. A Syrian grandmother traveling alone from Istanbul to Houston wept when a flight attendant sat with her mid-flight, speaking in slow, gentle English, guiding her through the customs form line by line. These weren't viral stories. They didn't explode across headlines. They weren't meant to. But to Rachel, they were the real indicators. The markers that a culture was evolving, not by mandate, but by intention. She kept a private folder on her laptop titled Flight Notes, Dignity Wins. Each story was saved there, some with images, others with voice notes passengers had sent. She read one every morning before opening her emails. A ritual, a reminder. Rachel herself remained mostly out of the spotlight. Despite requests from journalists, documentary crews, even TED Talk organizers, she declined the interviews. She had no interest in becoming a symbol. Symbols were too easy to dismiss once the news cycle passed. She preferred to be the quiet architect. And her next plan was bigger than ether air. It started with a phone call. The voice on the other end was gentle, unsure at first. "Mrs. Carter? I'm calling from the National Transit Equity Alliance. We read about what you did. We're trying to launch a nationwide initiative to improve dignity protocols in mass transportation. We'd like you to consult." Rachel listened, then simply said, "Send me your draft." By the end of the week, she had read through 87 pages of proposed frameworks, from subway conductors to ferry captains. It was a world she wasn't fully familiar with, but the themes echoed loud and clear: assumptions, invisibility, quiet cruelty. The very same systems she had dismantled in the sky were deeply rooted on the ground. She agreed to help. Soon, she was spending 2 days a week consulting for the NTC, helping design dignity-forward training for public transportation systems across major U.S. cities. Her input wasn't theoretical. She brought real-world data from ether air, case studies, anonymized video clips, and post-incident reports from passengers. She taught teams how to recognize unconscious bias without making them feel indicted, how to rebuild trust with those they served. But not everyone welcomed the shift. One afternoon, while reviewing a city's bus depot training proposal, she overheard a mid-level supervisor whisper to a colleague, "Here comes the first-class lady, telling us how to run things. Bet she still thinks we're beneath her." Rachel approached him calmly. "I don't think anyone is beneath anyone," she said, her tone gentle but unflinching. "But I do think we've normalized treating people based on assumptions. And I'd rather be the woman who dressed down and exposed that, than one who looked away and let it grow." The man blinked, and then slowly nodded. The incident reminded Rachel of something Evelyn Monroe had once said in a handwritten letter sent weeks after their shared flight. "The moment we let someone else's discomfort guide our silence, we participate in their blindness. Keep making them see." That letter hung beside Rachel's desk. Back at Ether Air, the Respect Beyond Appearance initiative was not only surviving, it was flourishing. The airline launched an internal recognition program, allowing both passengers and employees to anonymously nominate staff who demonstrated exceptional dignity-led service. They called it the Second Glance Award, a name Rachel had personally chosen. Each month, one crew member was selected, not for saving a life or averting disaster, but for the moments that rarely made noise, for holding space, for seeing someone when others didn't. Elijah, the young attendant who had helped the woman during turbulence, was the first recipient. He stood on stage at a quiet ceremony at Ether Air's Denver hub, eyes wide and voice shaking. "I didn't know who she was," he said, referring to Rachel, seated in the front row. "But that doesn't matter. What mattered was that she didn't need to be anyone for me to treat her with respect. And that's what I want us all to remember." The audience clapped, not out of formality but from something deeper. Shared conviction. Afterward, Rachel approached him. "You're not just the first," she told him. "You're the standard." He grinned, cheeks flushed. "Still nervous?" she asked. He laughed. "Less than turbulence." She smiled. "Good. Because this time, you're the one guiding the air." Weeks passed. Seasons began to shift. One brisk October morning, Rachel found herself once again at Denver International Airport, this time not for business, not for observation, but for herself. She was flying to see her niece graduate from art school, a young woman who, years ago, had once been told she didn't look like an artist by a portfolio judge. Rachel had told her then, "You don't need to look like anything but yourself." The gate agent didn't flinch when Rachel handed over her boarding pass. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Carter," the woman said, with a warmth that felt both personal and trained. Rachel smiled. In first class, she took seat 2A. Same as before. Not as a test this time. Just as a traveler. The crew was efficient, kind, and invisible in the way the best service professionals are, not because they're absent, but because their presence feels like air, effortless, supportive, needed. Halfway through the flight, she looked across the aisle. A woman in her 70s, wearing a faded shawl and orthopedic shoes, was struggling to reach the entertainment screen. A flight attendant, new unfamiliar, noticed. He knelt, adjusted the controls, and offered her a gentle explanation. The woman patted his hand. Rachel reached for her notebook and wrote one sentence. "It's working." When the flight landed, Rachel waited until the cabin emptied before stepping into the cockpit briefly, where the crew stood relaxed and chatting. "You don't know me," she said to the attendant who had helped the older woman. "But I know what you did back there." He tilted his head. "Was something wrong?" "No," Rachel replied. Something was finally right. And with that, she left the plane. Later that evening, sitting in her niece's tiny apartment filled with half-finished canvases and the smell of ramen, Rachel shared the story. Her niece, eyes wide, asked, "Do you ever regret letting it all happen? Being humiliated like that?" Rachel thought for a moment. "No," she said slowly, "because it taught me something I couldn't have learned in any meeting, any seminar, any study. It taught me that the people who change things are not always the loudest, or the most powerful, or even the ones who win first. They're the ones who endure long enough to be the turning point for someone else." Her niece leaned back, smiling. "So, you're like the quiet whistle that starts the avalanche." Rachel smiled, sipped her tea, and looked out the window at the city skyline. "Something like that," she whispered. And somewhere in the clouds above, another plane took off, its passengers unaware that they were now part of a story still being written, one choice at a time. 2 years had passed since the day Rachel Carter boarded that plane in a simple ivory linen dress, unaware, or perhaps fully aware, that everything was about to change. The ripples of that flight had reached further than anyone imagined, crossing industries, borders, and even generations. What began as a humiliating encounter in row 2A had evolved into a movement, one that quietly reshaped the way people thought about dignity, service, and the hidden cost of assumptions. But revolutions, Rachel knew, rarely end with applause. They settle into the soil, invisible but alive, growing slowly in the habits and decisions of those touched by them. That's why she hadn't stopped. She'd taken fewer flights, yes, but she'd walked into more union halls, more staff break rooms, more underfunded training centers in overlooked parts of the country than she ever expected to. She remembered one in particular, a bus depot in rural Alabama where the air conditioning had long since stopped working and the staff sat in plastic folding chairs fanning themselves with laminated route maps. A young driver had asked her, "Ma'am, why are you here? Don't you run like a whole airline?" She had smiled. "I'm here because no one runs anything without people like you. And too many forget that." Now, on a quiet spring morning, Rachel stood alone in a sunlit hallway at Ether Air's new Denver training center. The building bore no plaques, no monuments, just glass and warmth and the quiet hum of intention. It was the grand opening, though she'd asked for no ceremony. Still, she was there, watching from the second-floor atrium as the first class of new hires began orientation below. They came from everywhere. A woman who used to clean planes was now being trained to lead them. A deaf man was joining the call center team, supported by real-time captioning and a mentorship program Rachel had helped design. A mother returning to the workforce after 12 years was nervously taking notes with her daughter's lucky pen in her hand. This was the legacy Rachel had chosen, not buildings or logos but access. As the session began, the lead instructor, a former flight attendant named Samira, welcomed the group. "You may have heard about what happened here 2 years ago," Samira said, her voice rich and warm. "You may think you know the story, but this isn't about a viral moment or a public reckoning. This is about what came after, about how we choose to see each other when no one is watching." Rachel exhaled, slow and content. Then she turned, walking down the hallway toward a smaller conference room where a private meeting awaited. Ethan was already inside, waiting by the window, his suit jacket draped over a chair. His hair was more salt than pepper now, and his eyes carried the softness of someone who had watched his partner carry a burden few could understand and transform it into something unshakable. "You were right," he said as she entered. Rachel arched an eyebrow. "That's rare. What about this time?" He smiled. "About the long game. About not needing to shout to be heard." She joined him by the window. "It's never been about me. It's always been about them. The people no one sees until they make a mistake, or until they dare to sit somewhere society tells them they don't belong." He nodded. "And now they do belong." Rachel said nothing. She didn't need to. That afternoon, she boarded one final flight, not as an executive or a secret auditor or even a known figure. Just as a passenger. No fanfare. No announcement. The plane was half full, the kind of late afternoon departure where light streamed golden through the windows and people dozed quietly over paperbacks and podcasts. She chose economy, seat 14A, next to a young man who reminded her of her nephew. earbuds in, hoodie up, knee bouncing with energy. Across the aisle, a middle-aged woman was gently brushing crumbs from her child's chin, unaware that anyone might be watching her kindness. Halfway through the flight, the attendant offered snacks and drinks with the ease of someone who loved their job. No scripts, no posturing, just presence. The woman with the child asked if she could get a second juice for her son, who had already spilled the first. Of course, the attendant said, crouching to meet the boy's eyes. Happens to the best of us. Rachel turned to the window, the clouds sprawling like soft continents below. She didn't need more proof. It was already in motion. When the flight landed, she waited again, not out of habit, but out of reverence. She stepped off last, greeted the crew with a small nod, and walked through the terminal not as someone surveying it, but as someone at peace with what had been built. Outside, a car waited. Not a black sedan, just a regular hybrid. Her driver, a woman named Carla, yes, the same Carla who had once whispered mockery into the aisle of Flight 472, smiled as she opened the door. "I can't believe you still request me," she said with a laugh. "I used to be such a mess." Rachel chuckled, sliding into the back seat. "No, you used to be part of a broken system. Now you're part of the reason it's healing." Carla glanced at her through the rearview mirror. "That means more than you know." The car merged onto the highway, the city shrinking in the mirror. Rachel leaned back and closed her eyes, not to sleep, but to remember. She remembered the heat on her cheeks as she was forced from first class. She remembered the laughter, the camera flashes, the blank faces. She remembered the silence she chose, not as surrender, but as strategy. And she remembered how one moment, however cruel, could be remade, not into vengeance, but into structure, into scaffolding, into sky. In her mind, she saw a new world rising, not just in airports, but in every space where people once believed they had to look like they belonged in order to be treated like they did. And then came the final thought, one she had carried quietly for years, but now let herself say, only to herself, only in the privacy of knowing. They never kicked me out of first class. They kicked themselves out of decency. And she simply chose to bring it back. Not for herself, but for all who would come after. Because sometimes the most powerful people in the world are the ones no one bothered to look at. Until they changed everything,